all made up of the stuff of one another. And the stuff that we are made up of is ancient. Let's reconnect. Ego is a dream that soul is having. Soul is a dream that spirit is having. And spirit is a dream that source is having. Remember me saying that once before. I'm going to be thinking about soul today, the unfolding of soul, and we're also going to be thinking about dreams a little bit, because I'm going to be introducing this book, The Dream of the Cosmos by Anne Baring. And the subtitle is A Quest for the Soul. Look at the size of this book. It took Anne Baring 20 years to write this book. It's beautiful because it's so very personal, and what a lovely deep soul she is. She has a PhD in wisdom studies, and she's also a Jungian analyst, so a lady after my own heart. And I'm going to read a little bit from the chapter about Jung in a moment. Then going to talk about developments in science that are really exciting, that have happened just this week, or just this week I've heard about it. So all of it brings together what we've been learning about over the last few weeks. It really is as though there's an unfoldment of the learning and teaching that we're receiving, as though it's been coordinated somehow. Isn't that interesting? Anyway, let me begin. You can see that I went to one chapter in particular because all of my post-it notes are in a particular place, and it was in fact chapter 11. Jung and the rediscovery of the soul. We've been talking about the divine feminine and how soul is a word. The word psyche for soul, does actually have like feminine overtones to it more than mind. So we use soul, we're thinking more about a warmth of a loving quality to it rather than a more impersonal scientific word mind. The personal and collective soul. There are two types of soul. Jung rediscovered the wider meaning of the word soul. She's used a capital S there. I like this. I am just going to read this post-it note. Soul, this is a definition that he gave of the word soul. He's talking about the Red Book. Remember I showed you the Red Book? I have I'd say a copy of it. I have the Red Book. You can buy it. It's huge. It's too big for me to bring to show you and have on the table here to hold up, because it's just physically too difficult to do that because it's so big. But it's all of Jung's thoughts in his journals when he was discovering the spirit of the depths. He calls it the spirit of the depths. And we'll talk more about that another time. But he had all of these beautiful paintings and handwritten calligraphy, and it's a real treasure to have. Through these beautifully worked pages, we can follow, she's talking about the Red Book now, we can follow Jung's quest for the lost dimension of the soul, how it is rescued from neglect and obscurity, how its life is given meaningful expression in meticulously painted images and words, how it becomes a living reality for him rather than a theoretical abstraction. These moving words record his realization that the soul is an independent living entity or dimension of reality, something whose immense range we cannot grasp, whose voice is the spirit of the depths. And she goes on to quote him. I'm not going to read that bit now. I just hope it's given you a bit of a taster and made you want some more. And we will come back to it another time. But the collective and personal soul a little bit, that's what I want to talk about really. Because he mentions the Kabbalah. So we talked about the Kabbalah before when we've talked about the teaching of Sophia, gathering in the sparks of light, or Shekinah. How we're coming to in the Kabbalah, it's Shekinah. The great teachers of Kabbalah and whose traditions he was familiar with, Jung knew that the evolution of life on this planet follows a very slow gradient of emergence. The whole of humanity suffers because the increase of consciousness is so slow and arduous. He realized that the alchemical images he found in the texts he studied were similar to those in the dreams of his patients, and that they referred to a process of transformation taking place within the collective soul of humanity, as well as in the soul of the individual. I thought that was really significant, because it helps us to understand what we're experiencing at an individual level, also mimics. He says something about the macrocosm. Let me just find that quote because it's really important. Our psyche is set up in accord with the structure of the universe, and what happens in the macrocosm likewise happens in the infinitesimal and most subjective reaches of the psyche. Now a quote from someone else. The universe is as simple as it can be, but no simpler than to embody its purpose, which is evolution. Who was that? Einstein. And here's something else Einstein said. I want to know how God created this world. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are details. So this week, the Nobel Prize for Physics was announced, and it went to 3 men. Let me give you their names. Alain Aspect, John F. Clauser, and Anton Zeilinger. And it was for something called entanglement. If two properties interact and then widely separate, a subsequent measurement on one of those objects revealing one or another quality will have an instantaneous influence on the other object regardless of the distance between them. And that's called entanglement. Einstein wasn't happy with this, maybe because it took some certainty away, it made everything random. And he famously said, didn't he, God doesn't play dice. And he believed that quantum mechanics and this probability theory was somehow a provisional understanding, and there would be more to come that would point more directly and more evidentially to meaning and purpose. This strange quantum connection Einstein called spooky. He called it spooky action at a distance. And this is what these 3 men who've received the Nobel Prize have now found mathematical formula for, as I understand it, that this is actually true, this entanglement theory. And so now, whereas people might say, well, quantum physics is a little bit it's on the fringes of orthodoxy because it's so new and it's all a little bit woo-woo still. We don't, especially with Einstein using that word spooky, but it's now uncontestable, let's say. It's established science with this award, this Nobel Prize. And I was thinking about what that actually means for us. And I'm going to make reference to a Reconnective Healing session I did just yesterday, actually. So the person might be watching. I think they will be. I'm going to use a different name for this person just to protect their identity, but I will refer to what happened in our conversation. So let's call him Peter. That's not his name, but I'll refer to him as Peter. And so Peter was telling me that normally he's watched the playbacks of the Friday Let's Reconnect Live and always sensed something, always felt something. And he said there was one time actually when he felt something different to what he would normally feel. He felt some tingles around his mouth area, just above his lip. And he said just at the moment that he felt it, a second later on the video, I said, I'm feeling something around here, and I pointed to my own face. And he said that was really what Einstein might call spooky, especially because he wasn't just watching it live. So it wasn't as though the distance thing was happening, but the time was the same. He was probably watching it 8 hours, 10 hours later, after it had been recorded. So what is the cause of the entanglement? If entanglement does exist, then why isn't it happening all the time anyway? Why is it not that the neighbour in the house next door to Peter wasn't also feeling the tingles? And when we did the session, by the way, he was feeling lots. It was very interesting just to ask, did he experience more on a one-to-one scheduled session? Because what happens is you have a video call and we just have a little chat, and then I say, you have a choice, either leave the video running or I will ring you back in 20 minutes, but I'm staying sitting here and I'll do my thing, whatever I do, which doesn't matter what I do. That's just for me, my focus. It's not causing anything. And we'll talk about the cause in a moment. But we left the line open on this occasion, so he just heard me calling him back, and then he was telling me after 20 minutes or so all of these things he'd experienced, and he was saying that it was pure, high and holy. It felt like something that he would normally only experience having been in deep meditation. Really like a pure energy, like a different state of consciousness. And he also felt lots of physical sensations, twitching of his arms, limbs. And so he was telling me all of these things, and I was saying, that's amazing, that's incredible. And we were just having a little discussion. This has taken me off at a tangent a little bit, but I was saying, isn't that remarkable? Because neither you nor I have done anything to merit that. Normally if you have an experience of something that's like deep meditation, then you would have to have been meditating for a long time, or you'd have to have gone on a spiritual retreat and maybe be building that up over a few days. And for some people in some traditions, they're years in meditation to attain these higher states of consciousness. And yet it was just there almost instantaneously. And I said to him, I wasn't preparing before. I don't kind of go into or do any ritual or say prayers or anything. I can just be, washing the dishes at home and then think, in 5 minutes I've got an appointment, and I just go and I get set up, and then there we are. And there's something in that, because it's teaching us that it isn't about anything we do. It isn't about being worthy of it or having to attain it. It stops us from ego coming in, thinking it's about our virtue, or our practices. It's teaching us that we can drop those ideas of things. And I know that in the past I've had wonderful experiences through religion, through religious practice. And so what this is doing is training me, or showing me that I am not dependent on those practices. I can access these. We can all access this immediately and directly. And this is a shift, I think, that's letting us let go of our dependency, because some of that dependency gives us false ideas, about not being good enough and so on, and the sacred and the secular being separate things, okay? Whereas all of life is sacred. To come back to entanglement, which is what I was talking about, then how is it that Peter was experiencing something very powerful on the one-to-one sessions? And when we discussed it, we said this must be because the focus of attention, my attention was on Peter, Peter's attention was on receiving. We were both aware of receiving at that time, so attention must play a part in this. And that's why Peter's neighbour wasn't feeling anything. But when I started watching little videos and things to explain this entanglement thing, I had a new idea this morning that I wanted to share in this video. Previously I'd thought of entanglement as entrainment, and I've used that word before, and that's to do with when you have contact with something. So it might have been that I had contact with Eric Pearl's book, and then that carried a kind of energy, and I was starting to pick something up and feel something that compelled me to want to go to train. And then I was in the same room as Eric Pearl and being trained by him. Now somebody asked me, this was another person I did a one-to-one session with recently, and said, when you were with Eric Pearl, in the room with them and you were near them. I said, I was near them because I'm such a geek. I always go really near the front. And I even went up to him afterwards and had a photograph taken with him and gave him a hug. And I was curious myself to think, would I sense his energy? You know, when I'd read his book and knew that all these amazing things were happening, did that mean that he was somehow, a special person and had this special gifting? And in all credit to Eric, he's always said the opposite of that. He said no one is special and everyone is special. I am no more special. I'm not a healer. And I didn't really feel anything different. He's a lovely guy and everything. I didn't feel suddenly that there was I did in the room, but that's because we were all focused and there was, 30 or 40 of us or whatever. So it was powerful. But it wasn't from him as an individual. And that was the same when I went to hear JJ Hertak speak only recently, just back in about October time, I think it was, I went. He came to the UK, and again I sat really near the front, and I could have, literally a couple of meters as far away as the camera is from me now, and I could have reached out and touched him. And again, I didn't feel a sudden sort of buzz of energy any more than any other person. So it isn't to do with proximity and isn't to do with individual people, but it must be something else. My first ideas about entanglement were if you've had a connection with someone. That's why I could go home after meeting Eric Pearl and being trained that I was able to do this thing. And I was able to, have sessions with family and other people, and they would feel something. And I had that in my mind, that it's something that just gets passed on through people, a little bit like the apostolic, Peter, the Apostle Peter, who came the first bishop, and bishops always, they lay hands on the head of the next bishop and it's sort of passed down, isn't it? That's the understanding. And I thought something like that, similar, was going on. But I think it's even bigger than that includes everyone. I was having this conversation this morning with my husband, and he was saying, well, if you think about the substances of our physical makeup, of our physical bodies, then those atoms that are in the elements that make us all up, that's where you have entanglement. And I thought, there's something in that. So I looked up what it is that we all have. The human body is approximately 99% of just 6 elements. Some of you might know this, but I think it's amazing. Oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, carbon, calcium, and phosphorus. So I said 99%. That means there is a 1% I haven't yet accounted for. And of that 1%, you also have sulfur. 1% is made up of sulfur, potassium, sodium, chlorine, and magnesium. And so these are elements that we find in the world, in the natural world, okay? They're in fruit and plants and rocks and stones and the soil and everything, and they're in our bodies. And I just thought to myself, when a lady gets pregnant and there's the coding for that new baby to be born in the DNA that makes them unique. So there's the kind of plan. If you were thinking of building a house, you have your plan for your house. Then you have to go out and get the materials to build it. So the material for building that baby come from the woman's body and the food that she eats. So she eats an apple, and the apple's from a tree, and the tree's got its nutrients from the soil of that place. And then she might eat an orange, and that's from another country, so we're talking about thousands of miles the other side of the world. The nutrients and from the soil in that place. You see where I'm going with it? How this chain of food and all of the different elements and are scattered out everywhere in the world. Reminds me of the gathering in the sparks of light. And so there isn't a little storehouse that one could have if one wanted to be separate from everybody else. Let's imagine you're somebody who is very tribal, somebody who's quite racist, let's just say. And you think, well, my baby and my family are totally separate from those people over there. Okay, that's how you have to think if you're racist. You have to think that somehow you are superior and you're just different to them. You're of different stuff. But there isn't a little storehouse that you can go to and say, well, the potassium and the magnesium and the hydrogen and the oxygen and all those other things, the phosphorus, the calcium, all of those things that my baby has are going to be from that quarantined storehouse that I have a key for. No, it's a universal storehouse. We're all made up of the stuff of one another. And the stuff that we are made up of is ancient. It goes back to the beginning of life on this planet. People say, don't they, that the water that you're drinking was a one-time dinosaur pee or whatever, because it's just recycled within the system. And that suddenly made sense to me of the materiality of entanglement. So when I receive in Reconnective Healing, I'm getting tingles just talking about this. Eric Perlowas teaches I'm receiving. One person is receiving. I used to think it was about sending, and some modalities still talk about sending energy to other people. But Reconnective Healing is quite different, because it's an understanding of I just receive, and within what they say the field of oneness, we might say, because I receive, you receive. This is a direct reference to, or an exemplar of, entanglement. So the molecules in my body, all of the different elements, the carbon, the calcium, the sulfur, potassium, sodium, chloride, all of those elements that make up my body that are also in Peter's body, because I am receiving at that time and I am open to receive and I'm activating the frequencies. I feel sensations in my body and Peter feels them too. Why? Because of the attention. It's the attention and the focus of the conscious mind, that somehow activates this entanglement. Just as in quantum physics you have the wave collapsing. Is it the wave collapses and then becomes a particle? I forget, but there's something to do with the fact that it doesn't form until attention's given to it. And suddenly the penny dropped for me. This is the whole of the created world is structured this way. And this makes sense in real terms of there only being one soul, there being one collective soul of humanity, which links back to what we've said about the new sphere in a previous video. I'll link these at the end, or if I can only link so many videos at the end, but I will put it all in the description. And how when we go within and do the work, just like that quote from Jung, at the infinitesimally small part of the soul affects the macrocosm because of entanglement, because we share the same stuff. And just as something I do using my conscious mind affects a particle in me, then a particle thousands of miles away also is impacted, is affected. Isn't it amazing and wonderful and awe-inspiring? This is the mechanics of the soul. And as Einstein had a vision for it, we are beginning to be shown the ways of God. and perhaps rediscovering the soul, reclaiming the sacred, the sense of the sacred, and what is lost when we treat the world as though it is just something separate to us and something to use, a commodity. Because actually, when we abuse the earth, something in us is impoverishing. Something of us shares the sickness of the earth and will show up as sickness because of entanglement. We start looking after, we start giving out love, receiving healing, believing in and working towards wholeness, and we see that wholeness begin to manifest in the world. Isn't it exciting? Exciting times to be alive. So lots to think about there. And just let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear your comments. I apologise for my lack of technical knowledge about all of this. I'm just learning and grasping. In fact, I've got a real hunger to want to learn more. So I'm going to be looking, because it's only been this week, I suspect there'll be videos about the Nobel Prize and what it actually means. In fact, I think there's something like about entanglement for 7-year-olds, a YouTube video, so I'll link that below. I'll be watching that one. And anything else that I find that helps us to understand. And let's hope and hold a vision and pray for that time when science and spirituality come together. Because pursuing this as a scientist, you're going to come to a point where you run out of answers to help make sense of it without a kind of alliance with this psychologist, depth psychology. And don't forget, psychology is really the science of the soul, understanding the soul, because psyche means mind, soul in the Greek, same word. And so exciting times to watch this space. So I hope I've whetted your appetite to experience more of this entanglement in our Friday sessions when we come together and do Let's Reconnect Live. And we'll be doing that this Friday, 2 o'clock UK time. And then also I will be introducing something next week, next Tuesday, about plans for Lent. I've got something in mind for Lent, so I'll talk more about that then. And I hope that you'll be keen to join me in a kind of practice, a deepening practice as we approach Lent. No, as we approach Easter, as we do Lent. Okay, so thanks for watching. Take care. God bless. Bye for now. All my love.